This paper was presented at the JCT Traffic Signals Symposium 2023 in Nottingham, thanks to the support of AGD Systems, INRIX, Message Maker Displays, PTV Group, Simplify Systems, Smart Micro UK and TRL Software.
Hi everyone. Today I'm going to talk about the geometric layout design of junction approaches where we have segregated cycle traffic. With the release of Chapter 6 and then LTM 120, catering for segregated cyclists has become far more common in our work. In LTM 120, we're given a list of different types of cycle facilities we can use at traffic signals in descending order of protection for cyclists. We obviously want to maximise the protection of cyclists, so I take this to be in order of preference. Today, though, we're going to be focusing on the bottom of this list, so working upwards, advanced cycle stop lines, early release, and cycle gates. So if we start with the signal-controlled junction approach with no cycle facilities, here we've got 2 metre wide footways, 3 metre wide traffic lanes, and 3 metres between the stop line and the first line of crossing studs. Through all the options we'll look at, those things will remain constant. Now, what used to happen a lot was someone would say, we need to do something for cyclists. And what you tended to get from some transport planners was this: an advanced cycle stop line. Slap a bit of paint down and you're done. Maybe you'd get a bit of coloured surfacing too if you were lucky, but ultimately this was pretty useless for cyclists. If a car or anything bigger arrived at the red light before them, cyclists just couldn't get to it. If you were really lucky, you'd get a cycle lane leading to the advanced cycle stop line area. We're going to keep a constant 2 metre width for cycle lanes from here on. But what protection does this give to cyclists on the approach? Not much. We should be segregating cyclists from motorised traffic as much as we can. So let's add a half-metre segregating strip in there. Right, so we'll take this as our first layout that follows one of the options in LTM 120. I don't think I've ever seen an advanced cycle stop line area that isn't 4 metres long. Maybe I've led a sheltered life. But TSRGD allows it to be increased to 7.5 metres. That allows more space for cyclists to move over to the right if they need to, especially with the segregation, meaning they can't cut the corner anymore, so let's do that. Right, so all this helps cyclists that arrive at a red signal get ahead of the stopped motorised traffic. But they all get released at the same time, so are immediately in conflict again by the time they get into the junction. One step up on LTM 120 list of cycle facilities from an ASL is early release. This is generally used with an ASL and gives a head start to cyclists who are waiting when the low-level cycle signal turns green. Gives cyclists some separation in time, but it provides nothing for cyclists who arrive while the signal for other traffic is already green. Cyclists who arrive then emerge from their segregated cycle lane straight into conflict with other moving traffic. This, I presume, is a key reason why LTM 120 advises that ASLs are not suitable for approaches with high flows or that spend more than 30% of the cycle time on green. If we take one more step up the list, we get to a cycle gate. Now, this controls the conflict between cyclists and motorists who arrive during a green signal, but it needs more islands, more highway width, more highway length, more poles and more signals. The additional length is particularly important to make sure it's clear to drivers which signal heads relate to which stop lines. So we have ASLs, which don't need an additional highway width or length or additional poles, but also don't segregate cyclists from other traffic in time. An early release gives a bit of segregation in time for some cyclists, but the majority of issues remain, and a cycle gate does separate cyclists and other traffic in time, but needs more carriageway width, length, and a lot more street clutter. So what else could we do? Well, if we go a bit further up the list in LTM 120, there is separate cycle phases. Now, I think this is severely underused option, especially being so high up the list of preferences. I've seen far more early releases and cycle gates in transport planning proposals, for example. Here's what that could look like. We need to widen the segregating island to around 1.5 metres to fit a signal head on. And because the cycle signal and traffic signal will be on separate poles, we need one more pole. But other than that, there isn't much else to do. If we compare it with the other options we've looked at, it needs a little more highway width, and one extra pole, but it covers less highway length than any of the other options. It fully separates cyclists and other traffic, and it doesn't add much street clutter. It's looking good. However, it might bring an extra set of interscreens into play, making the signal times less efficient and cause additional delay for all junction users. Now, I originally started looking at all this because we had a site with a proposed segregated cycle route on the main road of a junction where the highway width, boundary to boundary, was only 15 metres. So what we were looking for is a layout that doesn't increase the carriageway width. It separates cyclists from other traffic so it can be used on the main stage approach. It doesn't create street clutter in an area we want to be pleasant for people to spend time in, but we still want it to work as efficiently as possible. How can we achieve this? Well, I didn't think there was much more I could do with separate signals or a traditional cycle gate or any way to narrow those options down enough to fit for the site. So I went back to the early release to see if there was any improvements to be made with that. As mentioned earlier, the key issue with ASLs, even with an early release, was that cyclists who arrive while other traffic is at green are brought into conflict with that traffic. Now, the best solutions are often the simplest, and with that very much in mind, after great thought and deliberation, what I came up with was this. I just added a separate signal and a stop line for the cycle lane prior to the ASL to stop cyclists from reaching the conflict point at times when it would be potentially dangerous for them to do so. And you might think, how does that replace a cycle gate? Well, a cycle gate effectively works by adding another junction node prior to the junction. This stop line controls conflict with the pedestrian crossing and the rest of the junction signal phases, while these stop lines and signals create another node, albeit in the same stream, which controls conflict between cyclists and other traffic as they approach. This then allows the shown staging to be achieved. I'm sure the majority here will know this, but just in case, when the rest of the junction is being served, we're in stage 1, with the cycle lane at green allowing cyclists to access and wait in the reservoir. Then in stage 2, the cycle lane goes red, and the cyclists are held in the reservoir are released. When this is clear, we'll move to stage 3, where motorised traffic gets a green signal, and then this shuts down via the final stage to make sure the reservoir is left empty, which is needed because of the large distance between the two traffic stop lines. My proposed layout enables the same, or at least similar, staging sequence to be used. When the rest of the junction is being served, the extra signal on the cycle lane is green, allowing the ASL waiting area to be accessed, replicating stage 1 of the cycle gate staging. Then the additional cycle signal goes red, and the early release starts, allowing the cyclists already in the ASL to leave, just as they did in stage 2 of the cycle gate staging. Then the main traffic signal goes green, allowing other traffic to progress through the ASL, just like stage 3. We can't replicate stage 4 in this layout, but do we need to? The stop line of the ASL is never more than 7.5 metres away to meet TSRGD, compared with at least 18 metres between stop lines in a traditional cycle gate to meet LTM 120 guidance. So we don't really need the delay anymore between the control of each stop line. So back to the comparison table. This proposed layout doesn't use any more highway width than a usual ASL, with or without early release. It uses slightly more carriageway length, but only by a fairly small amount, and certainly a lot less than a traditional cycle gate. Its use of time is just as efficient as an ASL or a traditional cycle gate, as it doesn't introduce extra intergreens as separate signals would. It fully separates cyclists from other traffic in time, and it only introduces one additional pole, which even then could just be a stub pole, almost green across the board. So now I had the idea, I wanted to find out whether it was a stupid idea. I knocked up this rough theoretical junction layout and sent it to colleagues in another part of WSP in London who were involved in the writing of LTM 120. Now, they were a bit annoyed at first. Someone there even said to me that they hoped they could find a problem with it. Otherwise, they probably should have included it in the first place. In the end, though, they couldn't come up with any issues that weren't also present in at least one of the alternatives. These issues mainly around user compliance. We then sent this on to Active Travel England to see whether they would support its use. Brian Deegan, their Director of Inspection, spoke to my London colleagues and was supportive in principle, saying he had thought previously that something like this should be possible. He had some suggestions on things to consider when taking it forward, but I was then confident enough to start using it in our designs. So I did. This is a concept design for a road in Southport put together by my transport planning and landscaping colleagues, which makes use of the layout. The concept design provides segregated with traffic cycle lanes eastbound and westbound along the corridor, with both directions using the alternative cycle gate layout. This is one of a number of different junctions along the route. Unfortunately, there's a tree in the way of the cycle stop line in the northeast direction. And I think the really narrow point of the corridor was at one of the other junctions along the corridor. And I do still need to have a word with transport planning about the advanced cycle stop lines on the side roads, which have the old problems. However, I think you can still see how the alternative cycle gate layout gives a safe, conflict-free solution that fits into the scheme without the additional islands, poles, signals, and general clutter of a traditional cycle gate. What I think it really shows, though, is the need to always look afresh at your options for each site. Just because you've seen ASL's early releases, cycle gates, used in numerous places before, doesn't mean they're the right options for your site, or even the only options available. LTM 120 and Chapter 6 give us a list of options, but neither of them say that they're the only options. As long as what you're proposing will be safe, clear to understand for users, and achieves your objectives, then why not? We also know these options are not mutually exclusive. Early releases are nearly always combined with ASLs. All this idea really does is combine three of them. Going back to the title, when is a cycle gate not a cycle gate? Well, it's when it's actually a combination of advanced cycle stop line, early release, and separate cycle phase. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Ashley. Have we any questions for Ashley? Could you say who you are and where you're from, please?
Mark Roxburgh from National Highways. You also got two cycle phases very close together now on that design, on separate phases in the junctions.
Yeah.
Did you have any concern or mitigation putting forward see-through issues for people looking at the wrong signal head in the wrong action?
There's no reason why the first stop line encountered by cyclists couldn't be moved back and you'd still achieve nearly everything that was trying to achieve. The distance in a traditional cycle gate, the distance between the cycle stop line and the stop line after it is only 7 metres. So it's actually a bigger distance in the layout I'm proposing.
Any other questions? Can you take right to the top on the balcony? Have we got one over? Should we take that one? Well, yes, let's take that one first. Yes, please.
Thank you. Mike Hu, Atkins. I note your paper mentions sort of vehicles encroaching into the ASL area as a potential issue. Could you just comment a bit more on that? Because it appears to be something that could be an issue in stage 1 of the diagram that you've got. And we know that vehicle compliance with ASLs is not necessarily, well, perfect.
Yeah, but yeah, your alternative might be an ASL without that stop line. So it's not trying to be something that's necessarily better in terms of compliance than any of the other options. The things that it's getting an improvement on are more being able to fit it into the scheme at all and a lot less construction. You've got less road width to build, less poles to maintain, less equipment to maintain in general. So it's not, I agree there can be some compliance issues. Not TfL, Active Travel England, Brian Deegan, when I spoke to him, first thing he said was the first stop line on the approach when they have that in a traditional cycle gate, that's the least complied with type of stop line there is. So there's compliance issue either on that or on that, but you've got at least one of those in any of the alternatives. So it's not trying to do better on them.
Thank you.
Hi, Lyndon from Reading. A few questions came to mind. One was the increase in cycle time. What kind of increases were involved with the extra stop lines? And what type of detection, or even is the detection in each stop line?
In this concept, it was just at concept level, so we hadn't even got to prelim with it at this stage. But because the first stop line on the cycle lane just goes green when that arm's at red, it doesn't need detection because it will come on every time that arm goes to red to allow access into it. And then the advanced cycle stop line and the early release would work in whatever way you would choose to do that, if that was the option you were following, even without the first stop line.
So you hadn't considered being able to reduce the cycle time if there isn't any actual cycles there?
Well, yeah, if you were doing an advanced cycle stop line with early release and you weren't adding this extra stop line onto it, you'd have the same issues with that. And it's about whether as an authority you were happy with the performance of a cycle detector, that you were willing to rely on it always coming on, never having a false negative, false positive scenario where there might be a cyclist there and it doesn't give them the early release. The safer option might just be to give it every cycle if you can afford to. Yeah. But the first stop line doesn't actually add anything to the cycle time of the junction.
Okay, lovely, thanks.
Question there? Yeah.
Well, that's not you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything to stop you bringing the cycle stop line all the way up to the junction? So effectively, when the cycle stage goes, you, instead of releasing them into the cycle box, you just release them into the junction and they can go whichever way they want.
Sorry, which?
Do you want to go? Can you just get your diagram up? Yeah, so that's it. So you see, you've got the first cycle stop line. So if you take the segregation all the way up to the main stop line, if you see what I mean, that segregation strip.
Right.
And then you could effectively, on a low-level cycle, you could then effectively release them through the main stop line at the front into the junction during the cycle stage. See what I mean? That makes sense?
Not really, I'm not quite getting what you're saying.
Okay, I'll
Maybe
chat to you.
take it offline.
I'm not going off straight away afterwards, so
Yeah.
certainly a bit.
Take it offline. Okay. I thought there was a question up there, but I don't think there is. It's 2020, so can I thank you for your presentation? A really good job. Thank you.